Okay, get comfy. I'm gonna start.
I need you to hold this so I don't spill it everywhere.
O tongue, give sound to joy and sing of hope and promise on dragon wing. The hunger of the fire lizards roused Manoli from sleep. There was nothing in the cave to eat because the previous day had been wet enough to keep them all inside. She saw that the tide was well out and the day was clear. If we scramble, we can get down coast and pick us up a nice lot of spider claws. They'll be gone soon, she told her friends. Or we can look for rock mites. So come along, Beauty. The little queen hummed from her warm nest in the rushes, and the others began to stir. Manoli reached down and tickled Lazy's neck where he lay by her feet. He slapped at her, rousing enough to let out a huge yawn. His eyelids peeled back and his eyes sparkled faintly red. Now, don't you all start in on me. I got you up so we could be off. You won't be hungry long if we all stir smartly. As she descended agilely to the beach, her friends swooping gracefully from the cave, some of the other fire lizards were feeding in the shallows. Manoli called out a greeting to them. She wondered, as she often did, if the other fire lizards, with the notable exception of the queen, were at all aware of her. She felt it rude not to acknowledge their presence, whether they responded or not. Maybe one day they would have grown so used to her that they'd answer. She slipped on the wet rocks at the far end of the cove, wincing as a sharp edge made itself painfully felt through the thinning soles of her boots. That was a matter she'd have to attend to soon. New boot soles. With such rough surfaces she couldn't go barefoot, and she certainly couldn't climb barefooted, not if she had toes like a watch wearer. She'd have to get another wary, tan its leg hides to a proper toughness. But how could she sew the new leather to her old boot sole? She looked down at her feet, placing them carefully, as much to save the leather as her feet. She took her band to the furthest cove they yet explored, far enough down the coast for the dragonstones to be knobs on the horizon. But the long walk was worth the effort, for spider claws scurried wildly up and down the wide, gently curving beach.
Wait. Aren't the dragonstones out at sea?
Yeah, but if you walk down the beach away from what's directly in front of you, it will still get smaller.
She would need to sail to get...
Okay. The dragonstones are here,
Yeah?
out in the ocean. This is the shoreline where her cove is,
Yeah.
right? There's a straight line out there, okay?
Oh, she's
If
not
she
on the
walks
dragonstones.
down the beach, she's seeing the dragonstones off in the distance.
Oh, I thought she was on the dragonstones.
No.
But the book was somehow implying that by them going near the dragonstones and hearing music.
That's when they were sailing. They were near the dragonstones, but she's in the cliffs. The dragonstones are out in the water, and she's in the cliffs that are on shore.
Oh.
Okay. Hope we've cleared that up for everyone. Okay. The bluff had dwindled to a height just above her head in some places, and at the far end of the crescent sands a stream fed into the sea. Beauty and the others were soon playing havoc with the spider claws, diving down on their intended prey, then darting up the cliffs to eat. When her net was full, Manoli searched for enough sea wreckage to start a fire. That was how she found the clutch, covered as it was and almost level with the beach surface. But she saw the faint outline of a mound, suspiciously circular. She brushed away enough sand to expose the mottled shell of a hardening fire lizard egg. She glanced around carefully, wondering if the queen was anywhere about, but she saw only her own 9. She put a gentle finger on the exposed egg. It was softish. Quickly she patted the sand back into place and hurried from the clutch. The high tide mark on this beach was a long way from threatening the eggs. It pleased her to realize that this beach was a long way from any hold, so these fire lizard eggs were safe. She gathered sufficient wood, made a rude hearth, started her fire, killed the spider claws deftly, and laid them on a conveniently flat stone, and went exploring while they baked. The stream flowed broad into the sea.
Conveniently flat stone.
The stream flowed broad into the sea. Sandbanks had formed and reformed, to judge by the myriad channels. Manoli followed the stream inland, looking for the sweet cresses that often grew where the water freshened. Submarine bodies moved upstream too, and she wondered if she could catch one of the big specklers. A lemmy often boasted that he could tickle them into his grasp as they fought the current. Thinking of the spider claws roasting on her fire, Manoli decided to leave that exercise until another day. She did want some greens. Succulent cresses with their odd tangy aftertaste would make a good addition to spider claws. She found the greens well above the tide water, where the stream was fed by tiny trickles from the flat marshy lands through which it looped. She was greedily stuffing a handful of greens into her mouth before she really took in her surroundings. In the distance, low on the horizon, were lightning flashes against a gray sky. Thread.
Run!
Fear rooted her to the ground. She nearly choked on the half-chewed mouthful of greens. She tried to talk herself out of terror by counting the flashes of dragonfire that made a pattern across the sky. A wide, long pattern. If the dragon riders were already at work, the thread wouldn't get as far as here. She was a long way from it. But how far away was safe? She'd just made it to the cave before that other fall. She was too far away. Run as fast as ever she could to reach the cave's safety now. She'd the sea behind her, water. She'd the stream beside her, thread drowned in water. But how deep did it fall before it drowned? She told herself firmly that now was not the time to panic. She forced herself to swallow the last of the crust juices. Then she had no control over her legs. They took off with her, and she was running towards the sea and toward the rock safety of her cave. Beauty appeared above her head. Swooping and chittering, she caught Manoli's spear. Rocky and Diver arrived with Mimic, popping in a half-breath later. They experienced her alarm, circling around her head as she ran, calling out with the piercingly sweet tenor bugle of challenge. Then they all disappeared, which made running easier for Manoli. She could concentrate on where she was putting her feet. She made diagonally for the beaches, wondering briefly if it wouldn't be smarter to go along the shoreline. She'd be that much nearer the dubious safety of the water. She hurdled a ditch, managed to keep her balance as her left foot twisted on landing, staggered a few paces before she found her stride again. No, there'd be more rocks on the shore, cutting down her speed and increasing the danger of a badly twisted ankle. 2 queens gleamed golden in the air above her, and Rocky and Diver were back with Lazybones, Mimic, and Brownie. The 2 queens chittered angrily, and the males, to Manoli's surprise, flew ahead of her now, and high enough not to be a nuisance. She ran on. She came to a height, and the incline robbed her of breath so that she staggered to the summit and had to drop to a walk, clutching her right side against the nagging stitch, but somehow moving forward. Ahead of her, the Dragonstones were more than knobs, but too distant to reassure. One look over her shoulder at the sky burst of dragonfire told her that the thread was gaining on her. She broke into a run again, the 2 queens gliding right over her head, and she felt oddly protected. She had her second wind now at her stride, and she felt as if she could run forever. If she could only run fast enough to stay beyond the reach of thread. She kept her eyes on the Dragonstones, refusing to look over her shoulder. That unnerving sight caught the breath she needed for running. She ran as close to the bluff edge as she dared. She'd slithered down one cliff without desperate damage to herself. She'd risk it again to get into the water if she had to. She ran, one eye on the Dragonstones, one for the ground ahead of her feet. She heard the whoosh, heard the fire lizard's startled chirps, saw the shadow and fell to the ground, covering her head instinctively with her hands, her body taut for the first feel of flesh-scoring thread. She smelled firestone and felt the air heavy against her body. "Get on your feet, you silly fool, and hurry! Leading edge is nearly on us." Incredulous, Manoli looked up, right into the whirling eyes of a brown dragon. He cocked his head and hummed urgently. "Get up!" said the rider. Manoli wasted no time after a frantic look at the fire blossoms and the sight of a line of dragons swooping and disappearing. She scrambled to her feet, dove for the brown rider's extended hand and one of the fighting strap ends, and got herself firmly astride the brown's neck behind his rider. "Hang on to me tightly, and don't be afraid. I'm to take you between to Bendon. It'll be cold and dark, but I'll be with you." The relief of being rescued when she was fearing injury or death was too overwhelming for speech. The brown dragon half ran to the bluff edge, dropped down briefly to get wing room, and then surged up. Manoli felt herself pressed against the soft, warm flesh and burrowed into the hide-clad back of her rescuer, struggling for a lungful of air to ease her tight chest. She had one brief glimpse of her little fire lizards trying vainly to follow when the dragon winked into between. Sweat froze on her forehead and cheeks, down her back, on her calves, her wet and ragged boots, and her sore feet. There was no air to breathe, and she felt she would suffocate. She tightened her hands convulsively on the dragon rider, but she couldn't feel him or the dragon she knew she was riding. Now, she thought with that part of her mind that wasn't frozen in panic, she fully understood that teaching song. In terror, she fully understood it. Abruptly, sight, sound, feeling, and breath returned. They were spiraling down at a dizzy height above Ben and Weir. As big as Half Circle was, this place of dragons and dragonmen was bigger by half again as much. Why, the immense harbor of Half Circle would have fitted with dragon lynx to spare in the bowl of the Weir. As the dragon circled, she saw the giant star stones and the eye rock, which told when the red star would make its fateful passes. She saw the watch dragon beside the stones, heard him trumpet a greeting up to the brown she rode. Between her legs she felt the rumble of response in the brown's throat. As they glided down, she saw several dragons on the bowl floor, with people gathered about them, saw the steps leading to the Queen's Weir, and the yawning maw of the hatching ground. Benton was vaster than she'd imagined. The brown landed near the other dragons, and Manoli now realized that the dragons had been thread-scored and were being treated. The brown dragon half folded his wings, craning his neck around to the two on his back. "You can relax your death hold, lad," said the brown rider with tolerant amusement as he unfastened the fighting straps from his belt. Manoli jerked her hands free with a muttered apology. "I can't thank you enough for finding me. I thought Thread would get me." "Whoever let you out of your hold so near to Threadfall?" "I was catching spider claws, went out early." He accepted that hurried explanation, but now Manoli wondered how she could make it plausible. She couldn't remember the name of the nearest hold on the Narat side of Half Circle. "Down you go, lad. I've got to rejoin my wing to mop up." That was the second time he'd called her lad. "You've a fine pace on you. Ever think of going for a hold runner?" The brown rider swung her forward so she could slide down the brown's shoulder. The moment her feet touched the ground, she thought she'd faint with the pain. She grabbed frantically at the brown's foreleg. He nuzzled her sympathetically, humming to his rider. "Brant says you're hurt." The man slid down quickly beside her. "My feet!" She'd run the boots to uppers without knowing it, and her lacerated feet were bloody from toe to heel. "I'll tell the world. Here we go!" He grabbed her by the wrist, gave a practiced yank, and laid her over his shoulder. As he made for the entrance to the lower caverns, he called out for someone to bring a pot of numbweed. She was uprighted into a chair, the blood singing in her ears. Someone was propping her damaged feet onto a stool while women converged on her from several sides. "Hey, Minora! Felina!" yelled the brown rider urgently. "Just look at his feet. He's run them raw." "To Gran? Wherever?" "So I'm trying to outrun Thread down Narat way." Bloody near did. Bloody's quite accurate. "Minora, could you spare a moment, please?" "Should we wash the feet first, or—" "No. A cup of weed first," was Tegan's suggestion. "You'll have to cut the boots off." Someone was holding a cup against her lips, bidding her drink it all down. On a stomach empty of anything but a few blades of cress, the Fellis juice acted so quickly that the circle of faces about her became a confused blur. "Good heavens, the holders have gone mad going out in Threadfall." Manoli thought the speaker sounded like Minora. "This is the second one we've rescued today." After that, voices became indistinguishable mumbles. Manoli was unable to focus her eyes. She seemed to be floating a few handspans off the ground, which suited her because she didn't want to use her feet anyway. Seated at a table on the other side of the kitchen cavern, Elgian at first thought the boy had fainted with relief at being rescued. He could appreciate the feeling, certainly, having been sighted by a dragon rider as he was pelting back toward Half Circle, fully winded and despairing of his life. Now, with his stomach full of good Weir stew, his wits and breath restored, he was forced to face his folly in going outside the hold so close to a fall. And, more daunting to contemplate, the reception on his return to Half Circle. Talk about disgracing the sea hold! And his explanation that he was searching for fire lizard eggs would not go down well with Yanis. Even Alemi, what would he think? Elgian sighed and watched as several Weir women carried the boy off toward the living caverns. He half rose, wondering if he should have volunteered to help. Then he saw his first fire lizard and forgot everything else. It was a little golden queen, swooping into the cavern, calling piteously. She seemed to hover motionless in midair, then winked out of sight. A moment later she was diving into the kitchen cavern again, less agitated but looking for something or someone. A girl...
Elliot, get your foot off.
Okay, Chaz, you're going to need to take a little bit less space because your feet are... no, we're not going to fight.
My feet are right
Oh my God.
in a straight line. You put your...
Okay. A girl emerged from the living cavern, saw the fire lizard and held up her arm. The little queen delicately landed, stroking the girl's face with her tiny head while the girl evidently reassured her. The two walked out into the bowl. "You've never seen one, Harper?" asked an amused voice, and Elgin came out of his trance to attend the weirwoman who'd been serving him food. "No, I hadn't." She laughed at the wistfulness in his voice. "That's Grawl, Fënor's little queen," Felina told him. Then abruptly she asked Elgin if he'd like more stew. He politely declined because he'd already had 2 platefuls, food being the Weir's way of reassuring those they rescued. "I really should be finding out if I can get back to Half Circle Seahold. They'll have discovered my absence and—" "Don't worry on that account, Harper, for word was passed back through the fighting wings. They'll let Half Circle know you're safely here." Elgin expressed proper gratitude, but he couldn't help fretting over Yanis's displeasure. Maybe get a knife or a spoon, and don't stick your finger in.
Good idea.
He would simply have to make it clear that he'd been following Weir orders, and Yanis was nothing if not obedient to the Weir. Nonetheless, Elgin did not relish his return to the Seahold. He also couldn't politely insist on going when he chose, because the dragons were tired as they returned to their Weir, thread successfully obliterated on this fall. Some of the young Harper's worst apprehensions were relieved by Tegelen, the bronze wing leader in charge of that fall. "I myself told them you were safe, and a good thing too. They were all ready to mount a search, which for old Yanis is a remarkable concession." Elgin grimaced. "I suppose it wouldn't look well to lose 2 Harpers in a short time." "Nonsense! Already Yanis prizes you above fish, or so Alemi said." "Was he angry?" "Who, Yanis?" "No, Alemi." "Why?" "I'd say he was better pleased than Yanis to hear you were safe and scoreless at Bendon. More important, did you see any sign of fire lizard clutches?" "No." Tegelen sighed, stripping off his wide riding belt and opening the heavy warehide jacket. "How we need the silly creatures." "Are they that useful?" Tegelen gave him a long look. "Possibly not. Lessa thinks them a real nuisance, but they look and act like dragons, and they give those narrow-minded, hidebound, insensitive lord holders just that necessary glimpse of what it is to ride a dragon. That is going to make life and progress easier for us in the Weirs." Elgin rather hoped that this had been made plain to Yanis, and he was going to tactfully suggest that he was ready to go back to the Seahold when the bronze rider was called away to check a dragon's wing injury. Elgin found the additional delay instructive. He decided he would put his observations to good use in getting back into Yanis's favor, for he had an opportunity to see Weir life as unsung in saga and ballad. An injured dragon cried as piteously as a child until his wounds were salved with numbweed. A dragon also cried distressingly if his rider was injured. Elgin watched the touching sight of a green dragon, crooning anxiously at her rider as he leaned against her forearm, while the weirwoman dressed his thread-scored arm. Elgin saw the weirlings bathing and oiling their young beasts, the Weir's several fire lizards assisting. He saw the youngsters of the Weir refilling firestone sacks for the next fall, and couldn't fail to notice that they made less work of the onerous chore than Seahold lads would have done. He even ventured to peer into the hatching ground where Golden Ramoth lay curled protectively around her eggs. He ducked out of sight, hoping she hadn't seen him. Time passed so quickly that Elgin was surprised to hear the kitchen women calling everyone in to eat. He hovered at the entrance, wondering what to do, when Tegelen grabbed him by the arm and propelled him to an empty table. "Giselle, come over here with that bronze nuisance of yours. I want the half-circle Harper to see him." Giselle has one of the original clutch Fënor discovered in Southern. Tegelen said in an undertone as they watched the stocky young man weaving his way through the tables toward them, balancing a bronze fire lizard on his arm. "This is Rill, Harper," Giselle said, extending his arm to Elgin. "Rill, be courteous. He's a Harper." With great dignity, the fire lizard extended his wings, executing what Elgin construed to be a bow, while the jeweled eyes regarded him intently. Not knowing how one saluted a fire lizard, Elgin tentatively extended his hand. "Scratch the eye ridges," Giselle suggested. "They all love that." To Elgin's delight and amazement, the fire lizard accepted the caress, and as Elgin's stroking eased an itch, Rill's eyelids began to close in sensuous pleasure. "He's another convert," said Tegelen, laughing and pulling out his chair. The noise roused the fire lizard from somnolence, and he hissed softly at Tegelen. "They're bold creatures, too, you'll notice, Harper, with no respect for degree." This was evidently an old jibe, for Giselle, seating himself, paid it no heed, but coaxed Rill to step onto a padded shoulder rest so he could eat the dinner now being served. How much do they understand? Elgin asked, taking the chair opposite Giselle so he could see Rill better.
Everything.
To hear Miriam talk about her three, everything. Tegelen snorted with good-natured derision. I can ask Rill to carry a message to any place he's already been. No, to a person he knows at another hold or weir I've taken him to. He follows me no matter where I go, even during Threadfall. At Tegelen's snort, Giselle added, I told you to watch today, Tegelen. Rill was with us. Yes, so tell Elgin how long it takes Rill to come back from delivering a message. All right, said Giselle with a laugh as he stroked Rill affectionately. And when you've one of your own, Tegelen, possibly, the Bronze Rider said easily. Unless Elgin here finds us another clutch, we'll just have to stay jealous of you. Tegelen changed the subject then to ask about Half Circle Hold. General questions that did not embarrass or compromise Elgin. Tegelen evidently knew Yanis's reputation. If you feel too isolated there, Harper, don't fail to fly the signal and we'll pop you up for an evening here. Hatching soon, Giselle suggested, grinning and giving Elgin a wink. He'll be here for that, certainly, Tegelen agreed. Then Rill creeled for a bite to eat while the Bronze Rider chided Giselle for turning the lizard into an importunate beggar. Elgin noticed Tegelen himself finding a tidbit for the little bronze, however, and he too offered Rill some meat, which the creature daintily accepted from the knife. By the end of the meal, Elgin was ready to brave Yanis's worst displeasure and wrath to find a fire lizard clutch and impress a fire lizard of his own. That prospect made his inevitable return easier. I'd better do you the honors, Elgin, Tegelen said, rising at last from the table. And I'd also better get you back early. No sense aggravating Yanis more than necessary. Elgin wasn't certain how to take that remark or the wink that accompanied it, particularly as it was now full dark, and for all he knew, the hold doors were already barred for the night. Too late now to wish he'd gone back as soon as the Dragon Riders had returned from the fall, but then he wouldn't have met Rill. They were aloft, Elgin reveling in the experience, craning his head to see as much as possible in the clear night air. He had only a glimpse of the higher bend and range hills before Tegelen asked Monarch to take them between. Suddenly, it was no longer full dark. The sun was a handspan above the glowing sea as they burst into the air above Half Circle Harbor. Told you I'd get you back early, Tegelen said, turning to grin at the Harper's startled exclamation. We're not supposed to time it, but all in a good cause. Monarch circled down lazily so that everyone in the sea hold was gathered on the holeway while they landed. Yanis strode a few paces ahead of the others while Elgin searched the faces for Elemis. Tegelen leapt from the bronze's shoulder and made a show of assisting Eldian as the entire hold cheered loudly for their Harper's safe return. I'm neither crippled or old, Elgin muttered under his breath, aware of Yanis's approach. Don't overdo it. Tegelen laid his arm across Elgin's... Hey, stay on your side, Elliot. You're encroaching on Charlotte. Sit up and move over.
But then I can't.
Get over it. We're all sitting up right now, so that we all fit. Don't overdo it. Tegelen laid his arm across Elgin's shoulder in a comradely fashion, beaming at the oncoming sea holder. Not at all, he said out of the corner of his mouth. The weir approves. Sea holder, I am profoundly embarrassed at the inconvenience. No, Harper Elgin, Tegelen interrupted him. Any apologies are the weir's. You were adamant in wishing to return to Half Circle immediately, but Lessa needed to have his report, Yanis, so we had to wait. Whatever Yanis had been about to say to his erring Harper was neatly blocked by Tegelen's obvious approval. The sea holder rocked a bit on his feet, blinking as he reorganized his thoughts. Any fire lizard sign you discovered must be made known to the weir as soon as possible, Tegelen continued blithely. Then that tale is true? Yanis asked in a grumble of disbelief. Those creatures do exist? They do indeed, sir, Elgin replied warmly. I have seen, touched, and fed a bronze fire lizard. His name is Rill. He's about as big as my forearm. You did? He is? Alemi had pushed through the crowd, breathless from excitement in the exercise of hobbling as fast as he could down the holdway. Then you did find something in the cave. The cave? Elgin had forgotten all about his original destination that morning. What cave? Demanded Tegelen. The cave, and Elgin gulped and then boldly embroidered on the lie Tegelen had begun. I told Lessa about. Surely you were in the room then. What cave? Demanded Yanis, stepping close to the younger men, his voice half angry because he was being excluded from the conversation. "The cave that Alemi and I spotted on the shore near the Dragonstones," Elgian said, trying to give the proper cues. "Alemi," Elgian had to address Tegelen now, "is the seaman who saw the fire lizards last spring near the Dragonstones. 2-3 days back we sailed down the coast and saw the cave. That's where I think it's likely we'll find fire lizard eggs." "Well then, since you're now safely in your hold, Harper, Elgie, and I will leave you." Tegelen couldn't wait to get back to Monarth and the cave. "You'll let us know if you find anything, won't you?" Elgian called after him and received only a wild arm gesture before the bronze rider swung himself up to Monarch's back. "We offered him no hospitality for his trouble in returning you," Yanis said, worried and somewhat aggrieved by the bronze rider's precipitous departure. "He'd just eaten," Elgian replied, as the bronze dragon beat his way upward above the sunset-lit waters of the harbor. "So early?" He'd been fighting Thread, and he's wing leader, so he must be back at the weir." That did impress Yanis. Rider and dragon winked out, drawing a startled exclamation of delight from everyone. Alemi caught Elgian's eye, and the Harper had to suppress his grin. He'd share the full jest with Alemi later. Only would the joke be on himself if all the half-truths Tegelen found fire lizard eggs, or a piper, in the cave. "Harper Elgian," said Yanis firmly, waving the rest of the holders away from them as he pointed to the hold door. "Harper Elgian, I'd be grateful for a few words of explanation." "Indeed, sir, and I've much to report to you of happenings in the weir." Elgian respectfully followed the sea holder. He knew now how to deal with Yanis with no further recourse to evasions or lies.